It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
How we feeling on this beautiful Saturday night? The New York Mets respond to the ass whooping that they took on Friday night after losing to the Philadelphia Phillies 12-2. They came back on a late Saturday afternoon. It was not easy. It was tied late. They were down early. Then they had a lead. Then they blew the lead. Then they took the lead. Then we got a scare. Then we saw Edwin Diaz in the eighth inning. And the New York Mets get victory number 86 by knocking off the Philadelphia Phillies 6-3 at an electric Citi Field, which was awesome to hear. An electric Citi Field as the Mets maintain a 2-game lead for a wild card spot over the Atlanta Braves. And that is very, very important because we are now one day away from knowing our situation going into Atlanta. And I would be remiss to not remember or bring up that a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, it was probably during a drunken Rico. It was probably during many a Rico Brognas over the course of the summer where I said, man, if the Mets could get to the series against the Braves down by a game, I'd sign for it. That was the loser mentality that I had because my thought was, all right, this 3-game series is for the tiebreaker, which it is. The Mets and the Braves season series is dead even. And the winner of this series next week wins the tiebreaker. So not only are you winning the series, not only are you, obviously improving your place in the standings, you take the tiebreaker. So my thought was, if you're down a game and you win 2 out of 3, you're tied, but you have the tiebreaker. Well, here we are on the eve of the final game that the New York Mets and the Atlanta Braves will play apart from each other, where we'll find out how many games up the Mets are. Because the one thing we learned with this very important victory on a late Saturday afternoon is that when the Mets play the Braves in Atlanta, the rematch, if you will, from 2022, the Mets will have a lead. It will either be a 1-game lead. We call that the worst case scenario. That means the Mets lose on Sunday night and the Braves win. And you're still in a decent spot with a 1-game lead. If you win the series, you're up 2 at the tiebreaker. You essentially, I don't want to say clinch a playoff spot, but you put yourself in an amazing situation going into the weekend against Milwaukee, a 2-game lead and the tiebreaker. If you lose the series, though, it's tied and they have the tiebreaker. And now destiny has been completely taken out of your hands in terms of the Braves. Obviously, Arizona, San Diego, different scenarios. So it's kind of puts the pressure on. It's the worst case scenario, but you're obviously still in that spot of beat the Braves and you're fine. You have the status quo scenario. The status quo scenario, which I would sign for right now, means the Mets have a 2-game lead going into this 3-game series against Atlanta, where in a very similar way to 2022, you actually don't even need to win the series. Because if you have a 2-game lead, the status quo, which means either the Mets and Braves both win on Sunday night or they both lose, you can lose 2 out of 3 and go into the final weekend of the year with a 1-game lead. Now, you won't have the tiebreaker, so you'll have no margin for error when you play Milwaukee and Atlanta plays Kansas City, but you will escape Atlanta still in the driver's seat in terms of making the playoffs. In the dream scenario, the Mets beat Zach Wheeler on a Sunday night, the Braves lose to the Marlins, the Mets would have a 3-game lead, and all you have to do there is avoid a sweep. If you avoid a sweep, even if you lose 2 out of 3, you go into the final weekend of the year with a 2-game lead. So those are the scenarios the Mets find themselves in going into the finale of this series with Philadelphia. But to get to this scenario we're talking about, they needed to win on Saturday. This was such an important game. It was important for 100 different reasons. Number one, they just lost 12-2 on Friday night. Number two, you've got your ace on the mound, and that's it. I mean, there is an ace of the New York Mets. There is a tribal chief of this rotation, and without a shadow of a doubt, and who saw this one coming, it is Sean Manaea. Sean Manaea, since that moment with Chris Sale, of all people, where he watched him pitch and was impressed and changed some of his mechanics to kind of replicate Chris Sale, and Chris has had a great year. Mets are going to see him next week, so hopefully they can bomb him, but the Mets will see Chris Sale. Sean Manaea has blossomed himself into one of the best pitchers in the National League. And despite giving up a leadoff second pitch of the game home run to Kyle Schwarber, it was more of the same from Sean Manaea. And to do it against this lineup, this team, in this scenario, especially when you put yourself behind the 8-ball immediately by giving up a home run to Kyle Schwarber, this was another incredibly impressive performance by Sean Manaea. Now, let's go through this game. The leadoff home run to Kyle Schwarber, and I don't know how everyone consumed this game. I'm sure a lot of people were there at Citi Field. They had an announced crowd of 44,152. I didn't go to this game, and I didn't go to this game for one very important reason. My youngest son had a birthday party, and I promised my wife weeks ago, I said, I will take Spence to said birthday party. That birthday party was between 3 and 4:30. So as we were at this birthday party, as 4 o'clock rolled around, I kind of looked around. I said, I don't spot any Met fans. Honestly, it was mostly the moms. And I didn't see anybody wearing Met stuff. And I figured I'm safe. I'm safe from DVR hell. And I got through it, and I got home. And usually with these Saturday afternoon games, because the Mets have played a lot of Saturday afternoons in 2024, they actually got rid of Saturday night games. I end up not watching the game until late at night. I spend the day with my kids. I spend the day with my wife. I watch enough sports throughout the week. Now, I'll get to the game, but I usually get to the game much later. When I got back from this party, I looked into my wife's beautiful eyes, and I said, honey, this is a freaking pennant race. And so there will be no waiting around. There will be no, I'll get to this game at 10 o'clock at night. It will be, we'll get into this freaking game right now. And so I watched this game with my sons around me, with my wife distracted. And when Kyle Schwarber hit that leadoff home run, I had to stop myself because I wanted to scream the F word at the top of my lungs, like we all did. I mean, who wants to be down 1-0 immediately, especially after what happened last night, especially after getting their asses whooped on a Friday night 12-2. So instead of dropping the F-bomb, it was more of like a like you use the F, but you don't actually commit and go through with the word. But after the in which Manaea gave up the home run to Kyle Schwarber, pitched a very clean 1-2-3 inning. The Mets had a golden opportunity in the bottom of the first inning, and this is where my spidey sense for the team I root for started to turn a little bit more negative. You get a leadoff double from Jose Iglesias, and you even advance him to third on a ball where he really shouldn't have even advanced. Marte hit a kind of short fly ball to right field, but Iglesias, who's been using his speed, it's been one of his best weapons as a Met, challenged the arm of Nick Castellanos, and it worked out. Mark Vientos struck out. I mean, we saw that all night long. Mark put together one of his worst offensive performances you'll ever see. Pete had a really good at-bat, drawing a walk, and then Brandon meekly grounds out to second base. But we saw the bottom of the order supply the power. Two guys who have changed everything about this team over the last 5 days. Francisco Alvarez, who hits an absolute laser beam of a game-tying home run, which relaxed me. My negativity turned from, we're down 1-0, blew a golden opportunity in the first inning. This team has struggled with runners in scoring position for great periods of time throughout the season, including the last day and a half. And Francisco wiped it away with that laser beam home run. And again, and this is part of what I love about Francisco, he don't give a crap. He pimped it. He pimped it good, and he pimped it long. And that's okay. But the hotness of Francisco Alvarez, who on this homestand, really since game 2 of the series against Washington, because remember, the Mets won game 1 against Washington. They didn't score many runs. They won the game 2-1. It was a very ugly, cheapy kind of win, if you will. But they got it. I'm not complaining. The bats started to awaken the very next night, starting with Tuesday's game. And since then, Francisco Alvarez is 5 for 12 with 3 home runs and I think 7 RBIs. And that's with not playing the other day, which I think we all kind of look at and say he can't be doing that anymore. I don't know if it would have made a difference last night, Friday night. because they got pounded 12-2, which I think I've said a few times. Shows you how much it really did bother me throughout the morning thinking about that game Friday night. But Francisco Alvarez needs to be in the lineup. I know Mendy listens to the Rico. I get it. So, Mendy, friendly advice. You know we love you. No more sitting Francisco Alvarez. There are 7 games left in this season. There are no more day game after night games. There's none of them, unless you want to count the final game of the season, a 3:10 first pitch, as a day game after night game. And it's game 162. There is no reason Francisco Alvarez isn't in the lineup every day the rest of the way. He has gotten hot. We have seen Alvarez as a streaky hitter who, when he gets hot, can look like this emerging young slugger. So let Francisco Alvarez cook. But that's not all. Him getting hot over the last few days has been great. Him hitting the game-tying home run in the second inning was great. But Luis Angel Acuna, he was quiet in game 2 of this series against Philadelphia. Not that that's a big deal. He's been red hot since he's been inserted into the starting lineup with Lindor's back issue. And what does he do? A first pitch home run. He's hit 3 home runs this season. Luis Angel Acuna has been here for a week, and he's already supplied 3 home runs, 6 RBIs, and a ton of extra base hits. So when Acuna first pitch against Ranger Suarez swatted one into the left field seats, I almost said the F word again, except it was a much happier F word. It was a like, F yeah kind of moment. Manaea gave it back when he gave up the home run to Castellanos, and that was really it for Sean. I mean, he was so good in this game. He was dominant. He was getting a lot of weak contact. He was in complete control like he has been for the last couple of months. Sucks when he gives up the home run to Castellanos. 2-1 game becomes a 2-2 game. But after that, he went back to dominating. Got the next 3, got the next 3 in the 6th, got the next 3 in the 7th, and that's where things got very interesting. Sean Manaea, when this season started, was a guy that Mendy was very careful about in terms of third time around the batting order. Well, we've seen Mendy push Manaea a lot more recently to some mixed results. Like, he had only faced 1 batter in the 8th inning prior to this game, and he gave up a hit. So we haven't seen him kind of bust through that 8th inning situation. So let's go through this. You have a bullpen that, for the most part, is pretty fresh. Think about all the guys they used on Friday night. They used Adam Ottavino, who cares? They used Huascar Brazaban, who cares? They used the young twins. They both stink at this point. And they used Eddie Alvarez, a position player. So you've got your fresh allotment of arms, whoever you want to go to. You've got Edwin Diaz pretty fresh. He pitched a night before that, the Thursday game against Philly. So maybe fresh isn't the right word, but he hadn't pitched the night before. You have Jose Budo. You have Phil Maton. You've got Reed Garrett, who really appears to be the circle of trust crew chief behind Edwin Diaz. And I get it. For the most part, Reed has pitched well. But Sean Manaea was in such control. His pitch count was so reasonable. Now, he did give up some relatively hard contact in the 7th inning. Bryce Harper hit one that off the bat appeared to have a chance to get out. And I'm not sure. I'm sure someone could double check this. I think that's out of Citizens Bank Park, the ball he hit the left field. I know there's that Twitter account that tracks this is a home run in this ballpark, or it's a home run in how many ballparks. Off the bat, and we know Bryce has done that left center field at Citizens Bank quite a bit. It doesn't get out of Citi Field. I think it gets out of Citizens Bank Park. Then the next batter hit that ball that got kicked by Manaea, and Acuna made the really clean play. And then he got Castellanos on a weak pop up to center field. So 2 of the batters hit the ball hard. But at that moment, going into the 8th inning of a 2-2 game, and thinking about who's coming up, because that's part of this. You have JT Realmuto, who is 0 for 2. You got the host of right-hand hitters, Sosa, Wilson, and Rojas, who you know. Mendy knows this. I know this. We all know this. As soon as you take Manaea out and you go to a right-hander, Rob Thompson's going to what's the word I'm looking for? Combat it? No. He's going to respond by going to all those left-hand hitters. He's got a whole bench of left-handed hitters. And quite frankly, all of those guys are better than Sosa, Wilson, and Rojas, though Weston Wilson is sort of becoming a Met killer. So maybe I throw him aside. You've got Brandon Marsh. You got Bryson Stott. You even have Cal Stevenson, who had a game named after him last weekend. So you got a lot of good options on the bench that Rob will certainly use to combat the Mets going to a right-handed reliever. And they're going to a right-handed reliever. I mean, we all know that. They're not going to either of the Youngs. So if you take Manaea out, you're going to a righty. So this is all kind of in the menu for you to make that decision. So here's what I'm thinking. And we did get a bunch of emails with their opinions on this. And this is, of course, before knowing any of the results. My thought was, all right, I now just took a 3-run lead. And that does change the trajectory of this. Okay? I think I just said it was tied. It was tied after 7. But remember, the Mets took the lead in the bottom of the 7th. Brandon Nimmo hit the little bloop RBI single that he was diving at. And then Francisco Alvarez, our man, our hero, came through with a very, very clutch behind in the count 2-out double. So I think the thought process changes knowing you have a 3-run lead. So you have a 3-run lead. I love the idea of Manaea getting challenged to pitch in that 8th inning and saying, all right, Sean, you have a relatively low pitch count. It was at 86 after 7. You've given up 2 base runners the entire game. That's it. And both base runners were solo home runs. So you have not even worked from the stretch the entire game. I love the fact that you're throwing him out there against JT Realmuto. Also, keep this in mind about Manaea. He is as good against righties as he's been against lefties. There's no incredible split this season between how lefties hit against him and righties hit against him. So it's not that JT Realmuto is some terrible matchup for him. In fact, he handled him in the first 2 at-bats. So I like Mendy pushing him. Now he gives up a base hit. What do you do then? I wanted to give him one more batter. I don't think there's enough of a sample size of Manaea struggling in the 8th inning. Again, this was the second batter he has faced in the 8th inning all season long. Both of them got hits off of him. And I get that. But I see Edmundo Sosa, who you got out twice in this game, who's probably staying in the game. I don't think at this point you're sending up a left-handed bench hitter to go against Sean Manaea. And I got a 3-run lead. Now, the only negative to my idea of keeping Manaea in the game is that, well, what if Sosa comes through? Now you're going to go to Reed Garrett or Edwin Diaz with the tying run at the plate. You're giving them much less margin for error than if you go to them a batter earlier. There's one other negative that is very, very important, which is why I don't think I would have even gone to Reed Garrett. I would have gone right to Edwin Diaz, and I would have had both guys warming up. And here's why. There's a 3-batter minimum. If you go to Garrett to face the 8th place hitter, Weston Wilson, who's going to be pinch hit for, he was, that means Reed Garrett not only has to face the 8th place hitter, not only has to face the 9th place hitter, who will also be pinch hit for, but he's now committed to facing Kyle Schwarber. Do you like that matchup? Now, Reed Garrett, kind of the same thing. He does not have huge differences split-wise against lefties or righties. But it's Kyle Schwarber. It's a guy who has now hit how many home runs this season? Let me see. 36. Do you want Reed Garrett facing him? So where I would have done things differently than Mendy, and look, it all worked out. We'll get into what he did, is I would have gone to Diaz. And I know I've said this 150 times. I like using Edwin Diaz in the 8th inning of games. I don't have to make it, well, he can only get 1 or 2 outs in the 8th inning. In this case, it was only 1 out in the 8th inning, because what about the 9th inning? Well, what about the 9th inning? In fact, I went back and looked at how Mendy has used Edwin Diaz this season. Like, how often has he used him in the 8th inning of games? Obviously, he did it today. He didn't do what I would have wanted. Not the end of the world. I think there's a few different ways you could have skinned this inning. So he goes to Reed Garrett right after Manaea gives up the base hit, and Reed Garrett gives up a base hit. Now, to Reed's credit, he got Brandon Marsh to pop up. He got Cal Stevenson to ground out. So he got 2 outs while giving up a base runner. And then you go to Diaz for Schwarber, which I completely agree with, because at that point, I don't want Reed Garrett facing Kyle Schwarber. I want Edwin Diaz facing Kyle Schwarber, and it obviously worked. Diaz struck him out looking. So, to be fair about this, this was the 5th time Carlos Mendoza has used Edwin Diaz in the 8th inning of a game. There's one game I want to address immediately. I want to get rid of it, and that is the time he used him in the 7th inning, and that was when Edwin had lost his closer's role. I don't know if anybody remembers the specific situation. I'll explain it, because once I explain it, you'll say, oh, yeah, I remember that game. Couldn't sleep for a week after this game. I didn't have sex that night after this game. It was actually Memorial Day Friday. I had just cut my beard. The Mets had a lead. They went to Edwin Diaz in the 7th inning. Did fine. Did a good job. And then Reed Garrett gave up the grand slam to Patrick Bailey. And the Mets blew the game and lost it 8-7. So I don't include this game because Edwin was used in such a different way, because he was viewed differently. He had lost the closer's role. The Mets were trying to reset his season. So I'm not going to include that one in this discussion just because I don't think it's that relevant. So here are the other scenarios where Mendy has used Edwin Diaz in the 8th inning. All the way back on April 20th, they were in LA against the Dodgers. They had a 6-4 lead. There was 1 on, there was 1 out, and he went to Edwin Diaz potentially to get a 5-out save. I think we did a Rico right after that game as well. So you could go into the archives of Rico Brogna. I don't know why you would, but you can. Maybe you're bored tonight. You had nothing to do. But April 20th, I think it was a Friday night. That may have been the Friday night game they had against the Dodgers. But either way, he went to Diaz in the 8th inning with a 2-run lead, 1 on, 1 out. Edwin walked the next 2 guys and then struck out the next 2 guys. Did not pitch the 9th inning. Reed Garrett pitched the 9th inning. So we saw Mendy in April, his first month as Met manager, do what Buck did a handful of times in 2022, which I liked, which was, hey, this is the biggest part of the game. Let me use my best reliever. He threw a lot of pitches. I'm not going to have him come back for the 9th inning. I love that. Said it a million times. He used him again. The next time he used him in the 8th inning was months later. It was July 7th, the game against the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I remember this one specifically. I hated when Mendy went to Diaz. I didn't think it was necessary. They had a 1-0 lead. They were 2 on and 2 out, and Dednil Nunez had just gotten a big strikeout. And I just thought it was unnecessary to go to Diaz, and he blew the game. The Mets came back in the top of the 9th inning. That's when Jose Iglesias had that incredible at-bat against Aroldis Chapman. They took the lead. Diaz came back out for the 9th inning and pitched a clean 9th inning to protect his own victory. So kind of a mixed bag from Diaz when he was used on July 7th. On July 30th, and this one I completely forgot. I didn't remember this one. I remembered all the other scenarios, not this one. It was against the Minnesota Twins. They had a 2-0 lead, 2 on, 2 out. He comes in, he strikes out Byron Buxton, and then pitched a 1-2-3 9th inning. So very, very dominant in getting that 4-out save. And then the other one, the last most recent example of Diaz coming in the 8th inning of a game, was August 28th against the Arizona Diamondbacks. 5-4 lead, 1 on, 2 out, walk, grand slam, Corbin Carroll. Good night, see you later. I think 45% of us thought the season was over after that. So the results, believe it or not, have mostly been good, I think. I guess they're mixed. There's too good, there's too bad. But it's also, how do you use them? Like, the scenario where they went to him in Pittsburgh, I thought was unnecessary. The way they used him against the Dodgers, I would be much more aggressive in using him. The appearance against Minnesota worked out very, very well. And then this appearance worked out very well because he comes into a 2-run game, tying run at the plate. He strikes out Kyle Schwarber, one of their better hitters, comes back out for the 9th inning after the Mets gave him the run back. So he had a 3-run lead and pitched a dominant 1-2-3 inning. Edwin Diaz has been awesome, really, since that Arizona game. He's responded in a big-time way. I know there's been a couple of misses mixed in, including last weekend when he gave up the game-winning hit to JT Realmuto. But Mendy hasn't used Diaz a lot in the 8th inning. I mean, those scenarios there's 5 this entire season. I think he's got to do more of it. And I think that sometimes when you go to him, and we haven't seen this since since April, the one example against the Dodgers, you don't have to overthink the 9th inning. You have to think of this inning as the most important inning. So I didn't hate what Mendy did. I just would have done things just slightly different. I like him pushing Sean Manaea. I like him getting the opportunity to pitch the 8th inning. But I think that the 3-batter minimum may have played a role in why Mendy pulled him after 1 batter. Because like I pointed out, if you give him another batter and you don't go to Edwin Diaz, which he didn't want to do, he wanted to go to Reed Garrett first, you're marrying yourself to Reed Garrett having to face Kyle Schwarber. And in this case, it would have been with the tying run at the plate. So interesting stuff on how you want to manage this thing. But I love Mendy's aggressiveness. I love the fact that he is going to Edwin Diaz in these big spots. Because right now, when you think of the state of this Met bullpen is it's had its moments where you're like, wow, this is a good pen. Then it has moments where it's the worst thing in the history of baseball. Then it has these moments where it's pitched really well. I think lately it's kind of in the middle. Like, what is the circle of trust right now in the New York Met bullpen? You have yourself Edwin Diaz, who I think it's pretty obvious to say is a guy that you trust the most. And we talk about using him in these big scenarios. Where's Reed Garrett right now in the circle of trust? Reed Garrett, believe it or not, has not allowed a run in a month. Think about that. Now, I know this performance wasn't great. His performance against the Phillies last weekend wasn't great. So it's not as if everything's been perfect, but he has not allowed a run since August 18th against the Miami Marlins. That was the game they lost. That was the Sunday afternoon game when they were going for the sweep against the Miami Marlins. So Reed Garrett has pitched well enough to be in that circle of trust and basically that second head next to Edwin Diaz. Then you've got Jose Butto. And Jose Butto to me is very interesting right now because we just never see him pitch. Like, think about it. The last time Jose Butto pitched was on September 16th against the Nationals. That was the first game of this homestand, and he was great. He was fantastic. He struck out the side. It was the best we'd seen from Butto in a while. Before that, his last appearance was September 9th against the Blue Jays, 7 days earlier. His last performance before that was 3 days earlier, and before that was 3 days earlier. So Jose Butto has only pitched twice in the last 2 weeks, which is strange, which is why, is he in the circle of trust? I mean, his last performance was really good, but you almost forgot about it. You're almost like, where the hell is Jose Butto? But right now, when you look at this bullpen, certainly Alex Young and Danny Young are not trustworthy. Huascar Brazoban and Adam Ottavino are more early in games. We got to go to the bullpen early, which is rare these days with the Met rotation. We saw it on Friday with David Peterson, but how often are they having to go to the bullpen early? And then you've got Phil Maton and Ryan Stanek. So right now it feels like this bullpen is Edwin Diaz, Reed Garrett as the two clear-cut, I trust those guys. And I don't even know where you put Jose Butto at this point, just because he never pitches. We never see him. Phil Maton has also not pitched that much recently. I think a part of that is that the Mets rotation has been so good. But he pitched in a blowout situation against the Nationals. Remember, the Mets had those back-to-back games where they scored the 10 runs. He got a big out in the weekend series in Philadelphia, also pitched in a blowout. So we haven't seen him in a lot of high-leverage situations, but I would probably put Phil Maton on that middling part of the circle of trust. But hey, look, as long as the starting pitching is giving you 7 innings every night, you don't have to worry about it that much. Now, I don't know if that's going to continue, especially with who's on the mound in the finale. And I know that sounds mean. How did I say that about Tylor Megill? I guess with Tylor Megill, and I certainly can't be alone on this, especially facing a team like Philadelphia, as well as Megill has pitched, and I give him his flowers for how well he has thrown the baseball recently, nobody really trusts him. I mean, do we trust that he's going to continue his incredible streak he's been on against the Philadelphia Phillies. He has put together 3 of 4 starts since he has been added back to this rotation with the Paul Blackburn injury. 3 of his 4 starts have been very, very good. But I hate to look at opponents, but you kind of look at the opponent, especially when you're about to face the Philadelphia Phillies. 6 scoreless against the Washington Nationals, 6 innings. By the way, 6 scoreless, 6 innings, 0 earned runs. He did give up the 1 unearned run in that game against Washington because of the error by Acuna. 6 scoreless against Toronto, and his other good performance was against the Chicago White Sox. But Tyler McGill will get the ball in a monstrous start against Zach Wheeler on Sunday night. But a little bit more on this offense. Spent a lot of time talking about the pitching. Really good day by Pete Alonso that won't get enough credit. Pete Alonso had some very good at-bats. He drew 3 walks. He got hit by a pitch. And that, I don't want to say that was intentional, but the way the ball came out of, who was it again? Was it Kerkering? I'm trying to think who hit him. Let me look at my scorecard. That'll tell you. Yes, it was Orion Kerkering when he hit him. Right in the square of the back. But Pete Alonso got on base 5 times in this game. He got very lucky with the bloop RBI single to add the insurance run in the 8th inning. There was a lot of miscommunication. But nevertheless, on base 5 times. Brandon Nimmo starting to wake up. Got a huge bloop RBI single in the 7th inning. Jose Iglesias, we're running out of words. We are running out of words to describe this man. Not only did he come up and write a song that basically inspired the team. I know the song had been around for a while, or at least more than just when they called him up. He comes up, he becomes this super utility maven, and he hits the crap out of the ball. Doesn't even play every day, but starts to move his way into playing time. Gets clutch hit after clutch hit. Has been clutch all season long, any opportunity he's had. Then you have the Jeff McNeil injury, which forces him to be an everyday player. Then you have the Francisco Lindor injury, which has allowed Iglesias to be the leadoff hitter, and no one's going to debate it. Nobody's going to say, yeah, put Brandon Nimmo back in the leadoff spot. I mean, Jose Iglesias fits the leadoff spot. He's perfect in the leadoff spot. He gets on base. He gets clutch hits. He can steal a base. He can beat out an infield hit. He continues to be incredibly clutch. So I can waste your time by talking about how great Jose Iglesias is. We all know. But Francisco Alvarez and Luis Angel Acuna giving a spark to the bottom of the order. Big. Starling Marte. Look, Starling Marte deserves some credit in this game because he drew a walk against Kerkering that started the rally in the 7th inning. Brandon Nimmo stole a base that led to the Mets getting more insurance runs. And against a team like Philadelphia, you need as many as you can get. As far as Mark Vientos is concerned, I've said before that the Mets are in this spot where you got to play the hot hand. I think we've said that a lot throughout the season, but certainly this time of year, you feel like it's really important. Vientos appeared to be breaking out of his slump. Remember, he had a long 0-4 streak that he got out of in the final game against Washington. He had 2 hits in that game, drove in a couple of runs, hit a home run in the first game against Philadelphia in the 10-6 victory. So it felt like, okay, Mark's getting hot. And even the game against the Phillies last night, game 2 of this series, he drew a couple of walks, had some quality at-bats. But this was an awful, awful day all the way around. He went 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts. They call that the platinum sombrero. The platinum sombrero? Yeah. The golden sombrero he had. Then he took the platinum. He did it against 3 different pitchers. I mean, he was flailing at Ranger Suarez's changeup in the dirt. The at-bats were just, they were bad. They weren't just 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts. I mean, he was overmatched. I am not ready to bench him. I'm not ready to say, hey, if Lindor's back, let's just rejig the infield and have Vientos not play. I'm not there yet. And I don't want to be there with him. He's had such a great year, and this is just a slump. That's the way I look at it. And that's what you got to be careful about this time of year. Slumps can also go away real quick. Francisco Alvarez, we talked about this on the Rico. Should they sit him for Luis Torrens? Torrens is so much better defensively. But the thing you hold out hope on is he can get hot. And we know what he's capable of doing. Mark Vientos can get hot. I think he will get hot. We know what he's capable of doing. The other guy who fits that, who causes, at least me, because I think most people in the email were just bench this guy, that gives me pause because I know how good he can be, is J.D. Martinez. J.D. Martinez is going through, and I guess I'd have to go through his entire career to see if this is accurate, but it feels like the worst batting slump of his entire career. J.D. Martinez is struggling as badly as certainly we've ever seen him, and maybe we've ever seen him. J.D. Martinez has not gotten a base hit since September 9th against the Toronto Blue Jays. What's his 0-4 up to? Let me actually count it out. 7, 10, 14, 18, 20. 0 for his last 31? 0 for his last 32? Something of that nature. So J.D. Martinez is earning a place on the bench, and the Mets have guys hitting like Tyrone Taylor, like Luis Angel Acuna, where you want to say, sorry, J.D., you're going to lose your job. I want him to play on Sunday night against Zach Wheeler because my assumption, I'm making an assumption, that Francisco Lindor is not going to be in the lineup. The Mets have a 2-game lead. They have played well without him. He is recovering from a back issue. You want to give him, I think, as much time as possible before you bring him back. And to me, the goal has always been the Atlanta series. As long as the Mets had, a reasonable lead. The Mets have lost every single game on this homestand. I think we're talking very differently about Francisco playing or not playing on Sunday. But I don't want Lindor playing on Sunday. I want him to get another day. I want him to be ready for Tuesday. And I really want to see J.D. Martinez in the lineup on Sunday night against Zach Wheeler. By the way, a guy he's never faced. How about that? I was surprised to see that. J.D. Martinez has never faced Zach Wheeler. I find that surprising because I need to see one more offer. You got me. One more offer going into the Atlanta series. All right, screw it. Play the hot hand. Maybe that's DHing Acuna. Maybe that's DHing Vientos and rejigging the infield. Maybe that's, there's so many different ways you can go about it because Luis Angel Acuna is the hot hand that's playing so well right now that you don't want to take him out of the lineup, and you have a guy slumping in J.D. Martinez. But I need one more day because JD's too good for this crap. He's too good to continue this offer and be just completely lifeless. Maybe am I naive, Hoff? By the way, Pete Hoffman live from a bed. He's doing the Rico Brogna while cuddling in a bed in the city of Cleveland, which I respect. Actually, I don't even know if he's there right now. He may have passed out. He's in Cleveland. The reason Hoff is in Cleveland is because he does a great job with Giants radio, and the Giants are playing the Cleveland Browns. I actually had an email question for Pete Hoffman that I'm not sure he's going to be able to answer because he may have passed out, which is fine. Totally get it. The only negative is when I want to wrap up the Rico if he's passed out, what happens? I guess as long as you don't play the open over and over again, who the hell cares? But to me, I want J.D. Martinez in the lineup Sunday Night Baseball against the Philadelphia Phillies, and I am willing, if he takes another kind of ugly performance where the 0-4 continues, or just like a meek performance, like he doesn't do anything impactful, then I get going into the final week against Atlanta and against Milwaukee saying, all right, screw it. I've seen enough. One thing that could have convinced me was, well, Chris Sale is going to pitch the opener. Like, does J.D. Martinez have great numbers against Chris Sale? I looked that up, and the answer is not really. Now, he's faced Chris Sale a lot, so that's a positive. He actually has 41 at-bats against him, which is kind of unusual. Very rarely do you see player versus player head-to-head matchups featuring that kind of sample size, but it does make sense. JD's been around forever. Chris Sale's been around forever. But here are his numbers. He's 9 for 41, which is a .220 batting average, 3 home runs, 6 RBIs. But this is why you got to rest Lindor. Francisco Lindor versus Chris Sale. 14 for 34. That's a .412 batting average, 2 home runs, 1,000 OPS. The weirdest head-to-head with Chris Sale that I had to kind of rip my eyes out. I was like, wait, is that real? is Jesse Winker's 2 for 3. We don't even think about Jesse Winker against a left-handed pitcher, but he's 2 for 3. Pete Alonso's 0 for 5 with 3 strikeouts. That's a little concerning, but he's going to play. So I want JD in the lineup Sunday night. Call this his last stand. Because, yeah, Luis Angel Acuna is making such an impact that you got to keep playing him. You got to keep playing him. Now, let me read some of your emails, including one that wanted to call me out for the hot hand argument, because the other day I did say on the Rico Brogna, when Lindor comes back, Acuna should just go to the bench. I did say that. Let me read Alex's email, and then I'll try to defend myself. Alex writes, Evan, I've been listening to you all year, and you keep stressing, as of late, the Mets need to ride the hot hand as we fight for our playoff lives. Yet the other day, you suggested the Mets should probably bench Acuna if and when Lindor comes back for the Braves series. How could benching Acuna be justified? At a bare minimum, Acuna should DH if Lindor is healthy enough to play. We need to launch JD Martinez in his space and never talk about him again. Alex. So I'll tell you what changed in one day, because he's right. Yesterday on the Rico, we're trying to do Ricos every day during this pennant race. We were talking about Lindor's potential return, hopeful return. And what do you do with Acuna? You know, he's learning second base. He's learning the outfield. What do you do with him? And I said, he's probably just goes back to the bench, and he's a valuable piece off the bench. Well, here's what's changed. He has only played a handful of games in the major leagues. Think about that. So when we're talking about the hot hand, we're basing it on a very, very small sample size with Luis Angel Acuna. And in last night's game, Luis Angel Acuna went 0 for 4. Not trying to rip him or anything. He just didn't do anything. So kind of my feeling is, he's playing incredibly well. I appreciate what he's doing for Lindor, but it's such a small sample size. The odds are you put him back on the bench. Well, the next day, as in today, he responds by hitting a leading home run, a home run that gave his team the lead in the second inning, and then getting, I know it didn't turn into runs, but a big bloop double a few innings later. So Acuna's hot streak and sample size is growing. That's my simple answer. When we talked about it last night, he's played how many games in the major leagues? His homestand, basically. And when he came in to replace Lindor the other day, it's not a lot of games. But I think every day that goes by, if he continues to produce, you want to kind of keep him around. And I think that the easiest answer may be to use the DH spot for either him or Lindor. Look, if Lindor is ready and feels that he can play shortstop at a high level, then ideally you want Francisco Lindor out there. The leadership, the defense, everything that goes along with it. But because Acuna's learning a position, it probably seems to be the safest thing that if you want to stick him in the lineup, that's how you do it. Because the odd man out right now is JD Martinez. Tyrone Taylor is certainly making a great case to play. And by the way, that's the other option if Lindor is back and now it's the Atlanta series and you want to put your best guys out there. You may say, I'm going all in on defense. I want my defense to be the best possible group. And so you may see what you saw today in game 3 of this series, which is Brandon Nimmo's in left. Clearly, he's going to play. Harrison Bader's in center, while not hitting a lot, supplies A-plus defense. Tyrone Taylor in right, you DH Starling Marte. Therefore, you give yourself your best possible defensive allotment, and Marte DHs. Starling Marte is a valuable piece. He can steal a base. He's gotten some big hits recently. And so the odd man out remains JD Martinez, but you do it by improving your defense in the outfield, having your best possible outfield defense, which is exactly what Mendy did on Saturday. He put his best possible defensive unit out there. And look, that's the one thing that's great about Harrison Bader. He may not hit a lot, but man, he can play defense, especially the way he goes back on balls. It's really good. Danny writes, simple question. What is the drink in the green bottle they've all been drinking this homestand? I haven't noticed that. All right, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to Sunday night's game, and I admit I'm going to Sunday night's game in very bougie seats. Sit in bougie seats a couple of times a year. Sunday night baseball, final home game of the year, I'm going bougie. But I'll peek in and see what I can find. Are you implying something? Are you saying they're cheating? AW wants to first guess the usage of Manaea in the 8th inning. If Mendy was going to take Manaea out after one Philly reached base top of the 8th, why send him out there at all? Realmuto's a righty who hits lefties better, so it seems unlikely Mendy wanted that specific matchup. What was Mendy thinking? Like all pitchers, Garrett's more likely to be effective if he comes in with nobody on base. Hopefully it doesn't come back to bite us because this game's a must-win with Wheeler on the mound tomorrow. It did not come back and bite us. I think that Mendy was thinking along the lines of me with, I don't want to be set up having one of my relievers not named Diaz facing Kyle Schwarber. And so once Realmuto got on base, the thought was, I got to go to Garrett right away. Now, as far as why do you even give Manaea the chance to start the inning, I think because he earned it. His pitch count was 86. He had handled Realmuto well in his first 2 previous plate appearances. And I think it was a simple, let me go batter by batter and see if I can get him through this. By the way, here's the question about Hoff. And if Pete's not up yet, I'll try to answer it for him. Because Nicholas Orlando is not happy with Pete Hoffman. Evan loved the podcast, never miss an episode on YouTube. So he's a viewer on YouTube. During the last episode, I noticed something that caused me to pause. I noticed behind Pete Hoffman, he not only had an LT poster, but a Yankee pennant. This is the Rico Brogna. Why are we looking at a Yankee pennant? He needs to follow your lead and should be all Mets. I've always questioned Pete Hoffman's fandom ever since I heard him say he's a Ranger fan, but his West Coast team is the Sharks. Don't you agree there's an emotional attachment to our teams and there's no room for seconds? Can we put Pete on the hot seat and see what he has to say for himself? All the love and LGM. I think I'm going to defend Pete because, again, Pete passed out. I think that's what happened. And if he's sleeping, someone's got to defend him. We can't just all rip him. I think Pete wants to be fair to all sports and wants to be a respected talk show host. And I love that. I want to be a respected talk show host. I try, but when I do it, I got all my Met crap behind me, mainly because I'm doing the Rico Brogna. If I'm on WFN at home, that usually means I have COVID. And I would have to change this entire background just for one measly moment. Hoff, is like, hey, I want to keep this very sports-like. I want to keep this very fair and balanced. Kind of like the WFAN studios. It's not just Met stuff in the WFAN studios. And also, Pete doesn't like to admit this. Secret Yankee fan. Yeah. Very secret. In fact, never tell him about this because he doesn't like talking about him. But yeah, secret Yankee fan. Really, really likes them. I'm just kidding. All right, let's set up what we have. What we have here is a monstrous scenario on Sunday night. I laid it out at the top of the pod. It needs to be stressed. Going into the Atlanta series with a 1-game lead versus a 2-game lead. It is so night and day. If you go in with a 2-game lead, and I know this is a loser mentality, but it's the truth. You can lose this series to Atlanta and still be in the driver's seat. You can lose 2 out of 3 to Atlanta and still maintain a 1-game lead going into the final series of the year against the Milwaukee Brewers. That is why, if you can win on Sunday Night Baseball, McGill against Wheeler, it's not going to be easy. You are in an unbelievably great spot going into the Atlanta series where they just have to avoid disaster, part 2. If they lose a game, which I hate to say this, is the most likeliest scenario. It is more likely or than not that we are sitting here doing a Rico after a Met loss and a Brave win with a 1-game lead. Then it's simple. They have to win that series against Atlanta. There is no margin for error. Now, the reward for winning that series against Atlanta would be being this close to wrapping it up. You'd have a 2-game lead with the tiebreaker and would only need to win 1 game in Milwaukee to clinch a playoff spot. But it puts the pressure on winning that series. And look, they should win that series. I know the Braves are going to have all their horses going. Chris Sale, Charlie Morton, and Max Fried are all lined up for those 3 games, well, guess what? The Mets have their horses going. And the Mets have proven throughout the season, and they're going to have to prove it again because they're about to face the 2 best pitchers in the National League on back-to-back days. They can beat good pitching. They've done it a lot this season. And now, with the season on the line, they have to go prove it. Speaking of the Met rotation, this is a long Rico today. I'm sorry. There's a lot to talk about. What is their rotation for Atlanta? Mendy still hasn't confirmed it. So here is their options. I'll give you the menu of options that he has and the different thought processes that he may have. It is Jose Quintana's day to pitch game 1 of this series. Jose Quintana does not have great individual numbers against a lot of Brave players, but he's on this incredible run lately with a scoreless streak. Jose Quintana would be making that start with an extra days of rest. Jose Quintana has been better with extra days of rest, so that's good to know. Their other option is to go to Luis Severino on his normal rest. Luis Severino has been better on normal rest than he's been with 5 days rest. So those are the 2 options. You stay in order, and it's Quintana game 1, Severino game 2, Manaea game 3. That would mean skipping David Peterson. Because the one thing we know for sure is that Sean Manaea is pitching Thursday. He is the ace of this team. He deserves that. So the one thing we just know for sure, and that would be on regular rest, where Manaea also has better numbers on regular rest than with an extra day. 286 on normal rest, 336 with a 5th day, 411 with an extra day. So he gets actually worse with more rest. So if we know Manaea is pitching Thursday, the Mets have 3 options for 2 spots. Quintana, Peterson, Severino, only 2 of them can pitch. They can skip David Peterson, which I wouldn't have considered a few days ago, but 2 of his last 3 starts have been mediocre, and Quintana's pitching better. If we're going by the hot hand scenario, then it's Quintana. And it means David Peterson is pushed back to probably Friday night in Milwaukee against the Brewers. But your options are Quintana or Severino on Tuesday, Peterson or Severino on Wednesday, and Sean Manaea on Thursday. I am leaning for the very first time, and I know this is so reactionary, but don't you have to be if we're playing the hot hand game? I am leaning towards David Peterson being skipped. He's had a wonderful season. This kind of pressurized game is still relatively new for him. Quintana's been there. Remember, Jose Quintana was supposed to be the Mets ace coming into this season once Kodai got hurt. He's the guy with the most experience. So the way he's thrown lately, I kind of go with it. I go with Quintana, Severino, and Manaea. It doesn't mean Peterson's done. He's still very important. He pitches Friday night against the Brewers. And no matter what happens this week, that's going to be a huge game. I doubt the Mets are wrapping up a wild card spot while in Atlanta, though there is a scenario where that happens. You want to get into that scenario? Yeah, sweep the Braves. If the Mets sweep the Atlanta Braves, no matter what happens tomorrow, the wild card is over. So, yes, it is in front of them that they could just destroy Atlanta and, march through it. I was going to make a Civil War reference. I'm not. March through the state of Georgia and wrap up a wild card spot. And David Peterson would pitch Friday, in which you're thinking more about seeding. But that's where I lean on going right now, just based on the recency. David Peterson, just to keep this in mind, has been a lot better on regular rest with normal 4 days of rest, 10 starts, 2.40 ERA. With a 5th day, so pitching on your 6th day, 5 days rest, 5 starts, 2.97 ERA. Still very good. When he has more than that, which we would be asking him to do, 5 starts, 4.94 ERA. So he is one of those guys that gets a little bit worse in terms of rest. The other factor is Kodai Senga. Not for Atlanta, but for Milwaukee. Kodai Senga pitched a clean, scoreless inning in Syracuse, and he could be good to go to probably pitch 1 or 2 innings in Milwaukee. I'd eye him for Saturday. I would eye him for the Tyler McGill game because the Mets are going to be in a position where Tyler McGill is going to have to make a start or at least pitch a bulk of innings. So I think the Saturday game, would be Senga, McGill, Budo, the bullpen, kind of that formula. And then you would be in line for whoever pitches Tuesday. This is important. Whoever pitches the opener of the series against Atlanta would be in line to pitch game 162. So that's another factor here. If you want that guy to be Jose Quintana, he's got to pitch Tuesday. If you want that guy to be Luis Severino, he's got to pitch Tuesday. Based on the Brewers' struggles against left-handed pitching, Quintana may be that guy. And it's amazing to think about the turnaround of Jose Quintana, that we would be considering him as the ideal guy in this scenario. Obviously, Manaea is the ideal guy. Timing didn't work out. But without Manaea, Quintana being the guy to pitch the opener against Atlanta and then game 162 against the Brewers. Thing about the Brewers, it was mentioned on their broadcast today that they're done with starting pitchers going more than 5 innings. They have their division wrapped up. They are very unlikely to get a top 2 spot. That's basically done. So they are going to be locked into this 3-6 matchup where they win their division, and they're going to host a wild card series against whoever the third wild card team is. Right now, that's us. Right now, that's us. Doesn't mean it's going to end that way, because Arizona and San Diego are still a factor. The Mets are a game behind Arizona with the tiebreaker. Arizona will play San Francisco and San Diego to conclude the season after they're done with the Brewers, who they have so far taken care of. The Mets are 3 behind San Diego, but keep this in mind about the Padres. They end their season against the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks. So there may be some losses. And that's the crazy part, because San Diego is playing Arizona. As long as the Mets can stay close to both teams and they win their games against the Brewers, they have a great opportunity to catch one of those teams, if not both of those teams. Right now, and I've said this before, to me, there is very little difference between being wild card 3 and wild card 2. We don't know the difference in the divisional series between Phillies Dodgers, so don't overthink it. They're still tight. The Brewers or the Padres, like, who would you rather face? I mean, or Brewers, Padres, Diamondbacks, you still have to include them. Does it matter? I mean, we really overanalyzing it that much? You don't get home field advantage either way. So the difference between the third wild card and the second wild card, not very big. But because Arizona's playing San Diego to close the season, as long as the Mets win games, they're going to be able to pick up ground on somebody. So here we go. The final 7 games of the year. The final regular season game of the year. Carlos Mendoza was even asked, hey, this could be Pete Alonso's final home game as a New York Met. And Carlos Mendoza, this is up to you. You want to call this arrogant? You want to call this confident? Said, it will not be his last home game. We will have more home games. So he was not guaranteeing the re-signing of Pete Alonso. He was basically saying there will be more home playoff games. And as the great Joe Beningo would say, Mendy, from your lips to God's ears, bro. Because there is a lot of work for the New York Mets to have another home game after tomorrow night. They have to make the playoffs. They have to either get the top wild card spot, or they've got to go win the wild card series against whomever that team is. And then, yes, in a couple of weeks, they would host game 3 of the National League Divisional Series against either the Phillies or the Dodgers. So hopefully you're right. I am not thinking about Pete's last game at Citi Field. I am thinking about the job at hand tomorrow night, which is beating Zach Wheeler and securing at least a 2-game lead going into that series against Atlanta. I will clap for Pete Alonso like I always do. I love Pete. But I am not into that whole, hey, let me just say thank you. I'm not thinking about that. First of all, I hope Pete comes back. We've talked about that a lot. Not recently, because the focus is on the postseason. And it's kind of like Jake's last game. When Jacob deGrom pitched game 2 of that wild card series against the San Diego Padres, he was even asked after the game about it. As Jake was pitching, I'm thinking about get a win and keep the season alive. Like, that is so the focus. And you worry about the free agency stuff after. Even as a fan, I'm not thinking that much about it. But I think he will get a big hand. I think Met fans understand that. But Met fans have showed up the last few days, man. The place has been packed. The place has been electric. and I certainly expect Sunday night to be the same. We will have a Rico Brogna, not right after the game. Actually, I'm going back and forth about it. We could do a drive home. We could do that. A little drive home Rico Brogna. Since it's not really a series recap. We've done reactions to each game so far, so really it's just reacting to that game. In fact, screw it. That's what we will do. We will have a drive home Rico Brogna right after that game. So if you're watching it live, you can expect that within about 5 minutes of the game ending. Taking my son Jet. We're going to fly out of that stadium, hopefully with a victory, and we'll do a drive home reaction to the finale of that series. We'll have another Rico on Monday, an official preview of the big series with the Braves. And then obviously we'll have instant reaction Rico Brognas every night, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, to the New York Mets versus the Atlanta Braves. We are Ricoing every day until this season is over. We appreciate you listening, downloading, and subscribing to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.